All right, we want to be able to programmatically be able to talk to the server just like we did from Postman, right? We like to be able to send all these posts, put, delete, get, right? But from here, from this user interface. And to that end, right, we are suggesting that you implement it inside of a dedicated class, right? Of a dedicated JavaScript class called admin user service client. Right? All these operations of creating, updating, deleting, getting all these, right, should live inside of a dedicated JavaScript class, right? Uh, and and so let's build this here, right? We'll create this class. Let's copy this file. Let's copy this file, and let's create a file. We'll call it this, right? And what we're gonna do is that these files, right? This particular file, right? It's a JavaScript class that is specifically dedicated to talk to the server. That's that's its only role, right? That's all it does. Right? If you want to be able to talk to the data and get data and remove data and update data, you go through the service, right? Through this one file, right? So it's a good practice to, whenever you have objects that have that particular role, to put them in a directory, right? That has all the files that only have that role, right? If you want to be able to create courses or modules or lessons or whatever, you would have a service for each one of them, right? That would know how to create all these things. Yes. Well, no, this would be the service that manipulates the model, right? So the controller would use the service to talk to the model, right? So the service, the thing is that the service knows if there are any relationships between the model, any business logic would also might live here, and you can split it up into even more layers, right? You can have like a business layer that uses a service that then manipulates the model, right? We're not going to go into that layering. Yes. Yes, in our case, it would be our array, right? Which is maintained by in our case, by the controller, our little JavaScript file. But the model really lives, is going to live on the server. The server maintains the model, right? The array that is being maintained, the state of the application is maintained remotely. We're only ever going to maintain a cached copy, right, of whatever lives on the server. The server should always be the source of truth, right? We only ever have a small snippet of what the entire state of the application is. Only for rendering purposes, we would maintain a small little model. Yes. Okay. Uh, all right. So let's create this, and in here, we're going to create a directory called services, and in here we'll create a new JavaScript user service client. Notice the naming convention. I still follow the same naming convention. User is a particular feature. I'm working on manipulating users. Service is the role of this file, right? That's its reason of being. And then client, where's this executing? Is executing on the client. Then I'm gonna copy this start code here. I'm just gonna paste it here. And so I'm gonna remove these ellipses. And here's where we're gonna implement all these things. All right, excellent. So let's get started on one of these. All right, so first of all, we need to be able to use this inside our JavaScript file, right? We need to be able to instantiate one of these, an instance of one of these classes. Now, the syntax of this class, the way you create classes using JavaScript, is that you declare a function, right? And that function, if you just call it, then it behaves just like any other function. But if you use new, the keyword new on it, right, then the function is treated like a constructor. Okay, which you can pass parameters to initialize and everything, right? Now, the inside of that function, you get a reference to the instance that gets created, and that's with the keyword this, right? Like any other language. Now, you can then use this to declare any variables that are part of the of the instance, right? So any instance variables you declare using this dot and then the variable that you want to declare, right? That is part of the instance. Make sense? We're using it to bind the functions that are declared later that are internal to our class, right? So we have these functions that can only be accessed through the instance that is going to come back from our new. Make sense? All right. Notice we're declaring also a local variable called URL, right? That keeps track of the as a constant of where the server lives, right? As a URL. And notice that we also have a self there. See that self? Now this is to deal with a funny behavior with the keyword this. In any other language, this always points to the current instance. Yes, but not in JavaScript. JavaScript, this pointer moves around, right? It's always based on the context of the current function, right? So in this function, right, when this constructor gets called, it is bound to the instance function, yes, that is being used. But inside of the other functions, create user, find all users, and whatnot, the keyword this is no longer pointing to the instance, it's pointing to the function that you're in, right? So it misbehaves. It's not exactly what you think it is. If you use ES6, right, the newer version of JavaScript, then this pointer does behave the way you would expect, right, like any other language, right? But we're still using the old JavaScript. We'll introduce ES6 next week, all right? Anyway, so to be able to capture the original meaning of this, I'm going to store it in a local variable called self. Self is going to be a local variable, right, that points to the original pointer where this was pointing, which was the original instance. Yes? And then I'm going to use self from now on. Everybody okay? All right, excellent. So let's implement the very first and simplest of these. We'll use find all users. So find all users behaves, find all users is this one, right? Find all users, call blah, blah, blah to retrieve all the users as an array from the server, okay? And it was implemented in our Postman by just generating a GET request goes out to the server, right? Implemented as a GET request, I think, right here, right? All right, find all users. It's just a GET and with that URL. Well, to do that programmatically from JavaScript, that's very easy. There is a function in JavaScript called fetch. Fetch does exactly what it suggests, right? It goes out, you give it as a parameter, the URL where you want to fetch from the server, right? And so we can do that. We can say we want to go to this URL right here, right? So to get to the URL which is part of the instance, I'm going to use self because this doesn't work anymore, right? This points to this function as opposed to the top level function. So I'm going to say self.url. Right, so fetch now, by default, fetch sends a get, right? Sends a get to whatever URL you're sending, right? It also, the actual fetch operation, the actual HTTP GET request that sends out to the server, right? It's actually not handled by JavaScript. What fetch does is that it tells the browser, hey browser, you know how to fetch a whole bunch of things, right? You can fetch HTML, you can fetch JavaScript, you can fetch CSS, you can fetch images, you can fetch all sorts of things, right, to build a page. So browser, you know how to do this. Hey, why don't you do this for me? Here's a URL. Go fetch me this, right? And then the fetch returns immediately. It doesn't even wait. It doesn't even wait for the response to come back from the server. Okay. So it uses what is called an asynchronous communication, right? Meaning it doesn't block waiting for the response to come back, right? That's very important, especially in JavaScript, because in JavaScript there's only one thread available for JavaScript, right? The browser can have many threads running, right? And usually does whenever it's fetching things from many different places, right? It opens up many connections, right? A thread for each connection, downloading all the stuff to be able to render the page. So the browser knows how to handle a whole bunch of threads, but there's only one JavaScript thread, and we have to take care of that thread, right? If we block waiting for the server, right, our whole JavaScript page gets blocked, and it will not keep rendering. Okay, it's blocked and it's unresponsive and it's not listening for clicks, and we don't want to do that, right? So that's why we use asynchronous communication, right? Go fetch me this and then notify me at some point later in the future, right, when the response comes back from the server. It's an asynchronous communication. Everybody okay? Right. So we need to be able to register for a callback, so that you let us know when the response comes back. Yes. Right. So to do that, the fetch returns what is called a promise. A promise is an object that allows us to listen for a future response that will happen hopefully very soon. Yes. Yeah, it could time out, right? It could send an error from the server, all things, and the promise will notify you if some error happened or timeout or whatnot. Yeah, the promise will allow you to set up a try catch. Yep, yeah. For now, we'll deal with all this details a little later when we actually create servers from the back end. Right now, it's a I'm going to do a lot of hand waving, and a lot of magic is happening behind the scenes, right? I'm just going to let you set it up real quick, right? But we will create these from scratch a little later. Yes.
Just to clarify the promise, you said that that is what lets us know when the response of fetch comes back.
Yes, it allows us to register for a callback, where the browser is going to notify us and says, "Hey, you know that response you were waiting for? Well, that you were not waiting for. All right, here it is. Here's the promise. Do whatever you want with it." Yes. I'm sorry. Yeah, we could do that. We'll take a look. Use async a little later. Yep. Yep. All right. So here's our promise, and then the promise allows us to register for a callback. And the way we register is with using the keyword then. Then allows us to register for a callback, and we need to give it a function to handle the response that comes back from the server, right? And so we can create a function here, and that function will be called by the browser, and it will pass us the response that comes back from the server. And let's just do a console log and the response. Let's see what that gives us. Okay, let's see what that gives us. All right, so let's see how we can use this function from our JavaScript. So first of all, we'll need to load this file. We'll need to load it from our HTML. So we'll do script source equal, we'll go back one up to services, then one down to user.service.client.js. Okay. So now we have a link to this JavaScript in our HTML, so it's being loaded. Notice that I'm loading it before my controller, right? Before my JavaScript, so that in my users here I can instantiate it. I can create a let user service new admin user service client, right? I instantiate it. Now I have an instance of this class. Notice that now it's not gray anymore. Somebody's actually using it, and now I can use it. When do I want to use that? Well, let's see. We can maybe how about if we use it right here? User service dot find all users. Find all users is going to call, right? Find all users is going to call this find all users, and it's going to print the response, hopefully. All right, let's try it out. Let's see if this blows up. Inspect. Let's look at the console. Blah, 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 click, yada, yada, yada. Okay, never mind. Let's refresh. I had some breakpoints. Let's skip over them. Console, click, users. Did it call them? Let's see. Did it go in there? Users. Okay, there's our final users. So let's put a breakpoint there. and let's refresh. We don't really care about that breakpoint. Let's remove that breakpoint. Let's continue. Blah, 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 on call, yada, yada, yada. Users 51. What is this? Click add user. Ooh, do we break something? 51. Click add user, create user, add user. We have constant. What is it? Create user. Well, let me comment that out for a second. All right, there we go. So we're going into the find all user. We can step in. There it is. So it's going to fetch. It's going to give us a promise. All right, let's run that. So there's our response. There's our response coming from the server. See that? The server prints out saying that I went and I came back. Here's the URL that I try to hit. The status is 200. The server said, yep, it's okay. And some headers. And here's the body. Here's the HTML, HTTP body that's coming back from the server, right? That body, I know because I wrote the server, it's formatted in a JSON format, right? It's coming back from the server in a JSON format. It's stored it in the database. I'm sorry, this is a fetch. It's just retrieving the array from the database, right? And then returning it here, right? To actually see the content of that body, right? We can parse it using response.json. Response.json parses the body, the JSON from the body, right? And the way we consume it is that JSON returns again another promise. So we're going to return it. We return that, and the return is we can set it in the body, and we can consume it saying body.then, and here's the presumably these are all the users, and we can print out the users. We can print it out using console.log.users. Right, so let's try that again. Refresh. Continue. There it is. So we have the response, which are printing out, and here are the actual users. Right, here are the actual users, which we can now return from this array, from this function, and then use it to render our array from here, as opposed to this hard-coded array. Yes.
There could be a web security problem here. Since I saw the type cores, which is cross-origin resource sharing.
Yep.
So like, how do you prevent that exploit from happening when we like do the HTTP get HTTP posts?
Yeah. Yeah, like, as you were mentioning, notice that it's using cores here, cross-origin request sharing. Yeah, cores over here. This means that the server is running in a particular domain, right? Webdev, generic server, something Heroku, right? But the request is coming from another domain, my local host, running at 8081 or something, 8080, right? Usually that is considered to be a security breach, right? JavaScript are only meant to be executed back to, that can communicate with HTTP requests from the same server that they were downloaded from. All right. We have opened up a you can override that security by saying that you're willing to accept requests from other folks, right, from anywhere, and you can list saying only if it comes from this local host or from this particular IP address, right? What I did is that I opened up from anybody, right, so that if it can come from any one of you, right, running on any one Heroku, right, because I want to be able to receive requests from any one of you. Yes. So I opened it up so that all of you could just do a communication through this. And most public APIs out there, especially the ones that are by Google, by Amazon, by Best Buy, all of these commercial APIs that are out there, they usually open up for everybody. It says, anybody can hit me. Anybody can communicate and query and everything like that, which is it's a very common practice today, right? Yeah, and we'll learn how to do that a little later. Okay, so we can hit the server. We did hit the server. We got the data that we need. We just need to be able to pass it around so that we can render it. So how do we do that? I'm going to clean this up a little bit. Notice that this promise is being used only here. right? So I can rewrite this like this, like that, dot then, because I don't need the promise anymore. Also, because I have this return over here, this return is the return of this whole call right there, right? So I can rewrite this like that right here. Okay, and so if I don't really need this console, and if I refresh, this still works, right? I have the same 5 users, right? I'm printing out to the console, but I don't really want to consume this data here, right? Because my only responsibility is to go fetch the data, not to print it, not to render it. Instead, who needs that? My controller needs it, right? This call needs that. Yes, needs the data, right? So instead of me consuming it here, I'm going to remove this and I'm going to return. I'm going to return that so that here, oops, I can do that then here and get the users and do the console log of users. Right, so this should work just the same, but and now the call is being referenced from the users.javascript or from my controller. So the next thing would be that here I can just do what? Instead of doing a console, I can say my array of users is equal to the remote users. I can assign it to my local list of users, yes? And then I can call render users. You see that, right? And if I refresh, hopefully this won't blow up. There it is. Here's my Bob, Alice, undefined, and Bob again that we created earlier. Yes?
So you had promise in it before. How come you can just remove that?
Because that promise was being used in the second line,
Okay.
right? So I just put them together, right? So that because it returns, so I can just tag the dot then right there, right? We can do just a little more cleanup. This function, we can rewrite this using new ES6. So I can remove that and make this into an arrow function. Yes. This return, because it's only one line of code, I don't need this this curly brackets. Right, in JavaScript, this is in ES6, this is an auto implied return. This is an implied return, right? If it's just a single line of code, right? You can just use that line and it's an implied return. Also, because this function only has one argument, the parentheses are optional, right? So ES6 is very, very, very compact, right? Where as long as you understand all these implied things, right, it becomes very, very, very terse. Okay, right. So that's much more readable. That's much readable. I could even do a little further, right? I could say that this is well, let's see if this still works. Okay, still works. This find all users, this return, notice that this is the only line of code for my function. Yes? So I can rewrite this. I can rewrite this as an arrow function. And because I have that return, I don't really need the curly brackets. Okay? I think I broke something. Yeah. Because of ES6, this needs to be declared first. All right, yeah, I broke something. Never mind. Let me put it back. I need to fix it. All right, I'll leave the function for now. All right, so did that make sense? We've implemented the first find all. Let's try and implement all the other ones. All right.